Hello there. There we go. Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad.
Good. Here we go again.
Here we go again. Only you get to ask me the questions, which is fun.
That's right. Turn the tables. So to speak.
Thanks for volunteering to do this. I appreciate it. It's fun.
No problem. Yeah, happy to help and get to know a little bit about your processes too, because not just the editor, but also a contributor.
Right.
So just to start, how did this come about? When did you first get the idea you wanted to do an anthology called Gunsmoke and Dragonfire, and what's the history behind that?
Well, I write fantasy westerns myself. I have a serial that I've been publishing on Amazon, first in ebook form, but I just did the print book of the first 6 stories recently, called Once Upon a Time in the Wyrd West. Hey, got to get the name of the book in, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And there we go.
Do it. Shameless plug in here.
Yeah, shameless plug. Absolutely.
I did it last week, so only fitting.
Right. And okay, I find it's a hard sell, right? When you tell people that you're writing about fantasy and Western, people are confused. They might understand, space Western or science fiction Western, but you say it's fantasy Western, and generally the two audiences don't want to give the other side a chance, right? So I thought, well, I know there's more people out here writing this stuff than just me. And sure enough, you can find all kinds of weird Western lists and groups on Goodreads. But often I find when I tell someone this is what I'm doing, they're like, oh, really? I've never heard of that before. So I thought, okay, come on, right? Let's put together a collection of people who are doing this so that we can promote the genre and get it out into the world. Right. So that was the intention. Yeah.
And when was that?
August, I think.
Last August.
When I put out the initial call for submissions. Yeah.
So that was a quick turnaround.
I'm not good at waiting. I get these ideas and I'm like, well, okay. I spent a good deal of my 20s, I like to say, getting my mother's voice out of my head, telling me why everything wouldn't work, because she was very good at, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? And so, I don't know, about my mid-30s, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do things. So I don't hesitate when I have an idea, because I might talk myself out of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I've noticed, because I want to get into a little bit more of this lately, but your online presence and with your pseudonym, and you have all your fingers into a lot of different pies, so to speak.
Yeah, it keeps me pretty busy. Yeah.
Part of your mantra, just do it. So
yep. Yeah. That's right. Because what if you don't? Then you're going to wonder about it for the rest of your life and wonder, what if I had done that? I'd rather fail spectacularly than not try it, right?
Yeah, and the world we're in now just offers artists and authors, artists of all, whatever you're into, just a limitless amount of the ability to be self-promoting, I think, like no other time.
I agree with you, although it is hard to get heard in the sheer volume of material out there. Yes,
I struggle with that sometimes too. You're just like, well, there's so much, why mine, But
yeah,
I think that's just the artistic temperament too sometimes.
Yeah,
but I like your
agree with that.
I like your style of just go for it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, and it's brought us here, and it's got a lot of, 20 authors?
24 if you don't count the Robert E. Howard story that was public domain that I included.
Right. I wanted to ask about that later too. But maybe now's a good time since you brought it up. How does that connect? And tell a little bit the history of grabbing that story. That sounds very interesting.
Well, a couple of the authors, Zach Chapman most vocally, but a couple others as well, made the suggestion that we might want to include a Robert E. Howard story, because arguably he might be considered the founder of the Wyrd West genre. He did quite a lot of strange, horror and fantasy blended Westerns, and most of which were published in Weird Tales and other similar pulp publications, right? And, I thought, yeah, that would be really cool, an homage to the guy who came up with the concept, right? But I found it harder than I thought, because quite a lot of his stuff is actually still owned by different publishing firms that are very protective of their rights. And I don't blame them. I mean, you know, everybody loves Robert E. Howard, most famously, of course, for those who may not be familiar, the creator of a certain barbarian named Conan, right? So there are very few stories out there that are public domain in the United States. So I had to settle, since I intended to release in the US, for one that was not quite as obviously a Weird Western. It's a Solomon Kane story. And you know, he's a Puritan swordsman. So one might think, well, that's not gunfighters and stuff. And it isn't. But I argue that it still would be a Weird Western by all the definitions of what Westerns and fantasy are. So.
And that was just completely in the public domain. That's awesome.
Yeah. I researched that pretty hard. So I really hope I haven't made a mistake on that. But yeah, it said, I think there's something like 5 of his stories that are public domain in the United States. And it was one of them.
Great. Oh, that's a nice addition.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So 24 authors. How did you find we touched on it maybe a bit last week in my interview, but how did you find being on the other side? So being an editor, accepting stories, having to turn down stories, just that side of it. How did you find that?
I learned a lot. I get very frustrated. I'm sure every writer does. You submit things. You're like, oh, I know this is perfect. I love this magazine.
Yeah.
Right. They don't want it. Right. I was just scowling to myself over the number of things I've submitted to fantasy and science fiction over the past couple of years. They have yet to publish me. Right. You know, and you get discouraged. Right. But okay, from the other side here, really, it isn't about the quality of writing, because most writers out there who are submitting work are really good, and you get a lot of submissions. Yeah. It's like, I was surprised at the number of submissions, because who am I, right? You know, I'm just some hybrid writer. This is my first stab at being an editor. I threw out the call. I put it on my blog, but I also submitted it to The Grinder, which, for, you know, if you're looking for places to submit stuff and you're not familiar with it, just type in The Grinder in Google. You'll find it, and it's a great place to find places to submit your stuff. You can categorize by what you want to be paid and what the length of your story is and what genre you're writing. But, you know, so I put it up there, and I guess because of that, I got a huge response, especially since I'm paying a percentage of profits. It's not like this is pro rate. Right? Yeah. So I was kind of stunned at the amount of work that I ended up having to do. And I mean, no, it's cool though, because I got to read all these great stories. Yeah. But I had to turn down a lot of people who are really good writers. Some of them were my friends. I felt very guilty about it. And in some cases, it's not about, oh, I like this story better than that one. Some cases, like I turned down some stories because by the time I had decided about 3/4 of what would already be in it, and I was running out of the word count that I was willing to publish, because it gets really expensive after a certain point, I just had to go, okay, this doesn't quite blend with some of these other stories, or this has similar elements to a story I've already accepted. So the learning curve is that it's not necessarily about you, and you are not a failure just because something didn't take your story. It could just totally be dumb luck.
So many other options.
Right.
Did you get a lot that were like not the right genre or completely?
I did get a couple, but less than I expected. Yeah.
You just get some people, I think they're like, well, it's just a good story, but they don't pay that much attention to the call.
Always obey the submission guidelines, because there's a reason why people have called for what they've called for, right? Yeah.
And I even noticed sometimes, I'm pretty sure that some magazines, some journal, whatever, that they put stuff in there that they don't necessarily need. They just want to see, are you following? Did you read the submission? Did you read all the way down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Oh, you want my name in the header on the right. Okay. Does that really matter? Probably not, but it shows that so writers out there, if there's anyone listening who's not sure about sending submissions, and just, read those guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. I did get a few, this is one, I got a few that were not in the standard manuscript format, which I provided a link for on the page. The reason why I asked for that is because it's easier to copy and paste it into a different document to work with. Otherwise, I have to correct your formatting, and it's time consuming. I did do that for a couple of stories, but you know, I'm much less likely to want to take your story if you make me do more work like that, because it's so time consuming already. Right?
That's the thing, right? You need to make it as easy as possible for an editor.
Yeah. I mean, they're overworked already, right? I learned that. So, you know, they have more time, or you have more time than they do.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. That's good advice. So you have a story also in this collection. Tell me about that one a little bit. No spoilers. We don't want to, but what was the genesis of that, or how did that come about? I mean, did you write it for this, or is that something you already had?
No, yes, I did write it for this. It's called The Teeth of Winter, and it's officially one of that series, the Wyrd West Chronicles, that I'm writing. But I think it stands alone. You don't need to read the other 6 in order to know what's going on. And you won't need to read this one in order to understand what's going on with subsequent stories. It's just, if you're interested in completion, you're going to want this one, right? And the idea came from, I was reading stuff about the dangers of winter. And when I was looking up stuff about what is a Western, right? That's something that concerned me, because I wanted the stories to be definitively, you know, fantastical, but definitively Westerns as well, right? Yeah. So, and there's a thing called a Northwestern, right? A Northwestern takes place in a colder climate, often, you know, Canada or the Arctic, or, you know, even Siberia, or maybe an ice planet. You know, you could argue that a good deal of The Empire Strikes Back is probably a Northwestern, right? Because it takes place on Hoth. But so I thought about that, and my story, my series is, I try to make it very Canadian. Right? My characters are in Saskatchewan. It's a future post-apocalyptic Saskatchewan, but it's Saskatchewan. So I was, you know, I guess I was thinking about the fact that we Canadians have to live with winter, even in the warmer areas of Canada. The dangers of winter shape our culture, right? So I thought, well, I'd like to see how they do against that. And of course, there is a unique Canadian winter monster called a Wendigo that I thought might be fun to have my characters encounter. So,
cool.
Yeah, so I think that's about all I can say that doesn't make a spoiler.
We don't want spoilers, no.
Right.
And just give anyone who might be out there watching who doesn't know, what's publication date?
March 15th is publication date, right? You can order the pre-order on Amazon now if you're into Kindle books. The others will be available soon. I'm finishing up the manuscript today to send to the formatter, so it should be a matter of a week tops, right? That you'll start to see that.
Yeah, exciting. Month away.
Yeah, I know, it's so close. Which is why it's important to do the Kickstarter, so we can fund the version. So
everyone, if you're out there and you haven't checked out the Kickstarter, please do. Support Indie Lit. We need some help to get this one out into the world.
Absolutely.
So, but this is not your first Kickstarter, correct? The Wyrd West. You seem very, very familiar with and very good at doing these. So,
thank you. I've only done the one though, right? And that was for Once Upon a Time in the Wyrd West. Okay. But I read all of they've got wonderful stuff on Kickstarter. If you're considering starting one, about how to do it and what works and how to market, and, you know, read it and do it. And it worked, right? So hopefully the same thing will happen, but I'm beginning to get a little worried because we're a little behind where I wanted to be at this point. But yeah, it's still early. It's only halfway through.
Yeah, hopefully we can get some more out there in the next couple of weeks.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think I was trying to think of the first time I may have come across fantasy Western. I mean, what immediately jumps to mind, and because we talked about it last week, was our shared love of Stephen King, and definitely The Gunslinger. I could see that fitting into this collection rather well if it wasn't already,
Yeah, and if Stephen King wanted to accept a portion of profits, which I definitely no, yes, The Gunslinger was my first ever fantasy Western. I think I read it in 1990. I was still in high school. So, yeah. And yeah, I immediately fell in love. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's such a amazing crossover genre. Just to have the old school Western, but monsters, zombie, whatever you're into. I think it's a great. I'm wondering if some of the stuff I may have read was big into. There's a Fred Saberhagen series about a sword.
I have
that I read as a kid.
I have an omnibus of them. I haven't read them yet, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I can remember the title.
The name is escaping me right now, but that was pretty swords, fantasy. Yeah, I remember really enjoying those as a kid. What are some of your early influences? Like, how did you get started on this whole, not just as a writer, but just as a reader? What's your...
Let's see. I have to think about this. Okay. I think the big thing for me, I was one of those precocious kids, right? When I got to school, I already had a grade 3 reading level. And so rather than, curtail me, my librarian and my school were very supportive. And instead of forcing me to stick to the primary kids section, they let me read the intermediate kids section, which opened up a whole world. And my librarian, a gentleman named Edward Walters, I'd really like to give a shout out to him. I hope he sees this someday. He was, I guess he was encouraged by a kid who liked to read as much as I did. So he got me involved in that Young Reader's Choice Awards, and I read a lot, right? I used to hang out on the library on the weekend, right? My parents were also very supportive. When I was 10, I found The Dead Zone. This was my first Stephen King book. I think we talked about that last time. Right. And I started reading it, and she said, "This is not appropriate for children," and took it away. Right. So then I found it 6 months later, hiding in a box of books she was going to take back to the secondhand bookstore. And I started reading it again. She caught me at it, and she said, "You're just going to keep reading this if I hide it again, aren't you?" And they'd also taught me the benefit of being honest. I said, yes. She said, "You do know this is just a story, right?" And I'm like, "Oh, of course." Right. She's like, "Okay." And then within a couple days, she took me down to the public library, got me an adult reading card, and said she can read whatever she wants. And
nice.
Back. So, yeah.
Oh, there is anything better than like being young and having like a summer to read? I don't know. I don't think there is.
I am totally with you. Yeah.
I remember those like trips to the library with my mom. We just get like a stack of books and go at it.
All in my backpack. I'm the Hunchback of Notre Dame, staggering home. Yeah, that was totally me. Yeah.
And what was your first moment of, I think I want to write? Like, I think I want to tell a story. Not just be a reader, but I want to be a creator too. What's the history there? Okay,
so do you want the Reader's Digest version or the longer one?
Oh, give it to us. Long, just...
The long version. Okay, so there were two of these, right? I was, again, about 10, right? And I was devouring Stephen King, anything I could lay my hands on. I loved him. Firestarter, that was the thing, right? And I found a book. It's called Dance Macabre. It was in my library. I checked it out. I didn't realize it was nonfiction when I checked it out. But then I kept reading because I recognized, hey, I totally get where he's coming from. And you know what? This is me. I'd been, I ran out of books to read even as a very small child. And, you know, my parents, they weren't wealthy, so they couldn't just go buy me more or whatever. So I started telling my own stories to my grandfather. Right. And then who always had time for me. So that was cool. And then I started writing some of them down. Right. And I just been doing it, you know, for my own benefit, telling myself tales. And I realized, hey, you know, maybe I can do this. Right. So I professed my interest in being a writer and received very bad advice, which was, you know, it's great that you want to write, Diane, but you can't really make a living doing that most of the time. Yeah. You should get a real career first, and then you should, you know, worry about this writing stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And that has never worked out for me. Okay, so fast forward about another 10 years, I guess. No, more than that. I don't remember exactly how long. Anyway, when I got together with my husband, he had a small son. So at 19, I was a step parent of a 4-year-old, right? So, and I would, you know, like it was the recession of the 90s. Jobs were hard to come by. I was working split shifts, horrible hours, minimum wage, in some cases less than minimum wage, because that is what I could find, right? And, you know, I did that for a long time and got involved in that, right? And writing fell by the wayside. And then my husband was in a horrible car accident. And my son was 16 at the time. So, you know, he's kind of ready to do his own thing, right? And I guess it was a wake-up call. They gave him a 0% chance of survival. He was severely injured. He's still disabled from the accident. But I and he both kind of went, okay, what are we doing with our life? You know, and what I was doing with my life was working as a taxi dispatcher, which was a soul-killing, horrible job where people are mean to you all the time from every angle. The boss is mean to you. The people on the phone are mean to you. The cabbies are mean to you, right? So I spent some of the insurance money to buy a metaphysical store, and I started writing, and I did National Novel Writing Month that year. And I succeeded in doing the 50,000 words, and it was at the time sort of a D&D fan fiction piece, but it got me back on the wagon. And I thought, you know, I've got this nonfiction idea. I'm a witch in real life. I wanted to write a book on witchcraft. I had an idea that I didn't think other people had done. And I wrote that book, and I sent it to the publisher I wanted, and they took it, and away I went, right? So that's the Sable Aradia pseudonym. If you see that around, that's the name for my pagan writing. Yeah. So there's the novel on that.
And you've got, I noticed, like quite a few credits with your Wyrd West series. I noticed you have a story upcoming. I don't know, or maybe it's out yet. It's Terra.
Yes, Terra, Third Flatirons anthology publications published the Android Graveyard at the end of September. Right. I just, but you may be mixing that up with on January 31st, Cities of Dust, Plains of Light.
Yes.
Came out, which is a science fantasy anthology, and my story, The World's More Full of Weeping, is in that one.
Yeah, I strongly recommend checking out all of your web content. You have a lot of great stuff on there. I think a lot of writers can learn a lot from you, myself included, on promoting, and maybe you can put the links up if you have a chance.
Yeah, sure. You know what? Why don't I do that? Okay, this is my website, and it's hard to find, but it's not that hard to find. If you go to that, the 3 lines in the top there, it will show you the sub pages, because what this looks like is a blog, which it mostly is. And it'll have an about page, and that's where I've got which you obviously found. So yes, I guess it's not that hard to find.
Nope.
Right. And I don't know, what else should I put? If you're looking for my pagan writing and information, then you're probably best off starting here. I don't want to, this is sablearadia.com, where you will find links to my various blogs. And that's there. And I have a YouTube channel, LinkedIn, you know, all this stuff. I got to admit, I'm not as prolific as I sound. What I generally do is write for my blogs, and then I use their publicize function to circulate stuff to, you know, Tumblr and Pinterest and all that stuff, because I would totally lose my mind if I had to manage it all. So I do occasionally put unique content up on each platform from time to time. So, you know, yeah.
What, how did you find your first NaNoWriMo? How was that? To reach the 50,000 for the first time?
You know, it was exhilarating. It was exhausting, but it was exhilarating. I found I am not one of these people who can write a book in a month, right? Like if there's some indie writers out there who are making a great living churning out a book a month, and hats off to you, man, because I cannot do it. Right? No, it takes me hours, right? So I was basically in November, I shut my door and I come out for meals. And if you make me go to the store, I will. And I've done it every November since. Right.
Wow. So how many years is that now?
Oh, 9. Yes. 9.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 9 separate projects.
9 separate projects. I've always reached the 50,000 words. You know, I've never finished the novel in 50,000 words. And a couple of them, I you know, they're sitting in a pile. I have to completely rewrite them. I don't like them at all. You know, I'm not happy with where they went, but I've got to start. And that's the point of National Novel Writing Month.
You know, I think a lot of times we get stuck in our heads and you're just, can I do it? Can I do it? And something like that with an external deadline where other people are doing it, so you feel like part of something. And yeah, the external deadline just forces you to get that first draft on page, you know, on the page. And most first drafts suck. Like,
yeah, they all suck. Every first draft sucks. And crippling self-doubt has long been a problem for me, right? So National Novel Writing Month was one of the things that taught me not to do that. You don't have time for that crap.
No.
You know? But the cool thing, there's so many, I don't, but there's so many other writers who are doing this with you, and they're all crazy like you. And that support is really helpful because, you know, they're all suffering from crippling self-doubt. They all tell you that the first draft is going to suck. You go do stuff with your local group and you do write-ins, and they might share bits of what they've done. And, you know, I mean, you're laughing because you know it's terrible writing, right? But they, you know, and your writing's terrible too, but it makes you feel better because you realize that, you know, everybody's in the same group. And lots of nano projects get published. So, yeah.
Yeah, often it's not till you get it out that you can see the big picture, you know. You just got to get it on the page and then tweak. But I suffer from that too, where it's just you tweak as you go. And so you have after a month, you have an amazing paragraph.
Yes, it's fantastic. Hemingway would be proud, but
yeah, it's so refined and so edited, but the story's not there because I kept going back to edit. But something like that forces you to just blinders on and go.
You do nano too, obviously, because you sound.
I haven't done nano,
okay.
But
Well, you did that Deathmatch.
I've used the 3-day novel writing contest that I was telling you about.
Right.
As the same thing, because then you have even less time. It's 3 days, so you can't second guess a single word.
That's crazy. I admire
that. I wasn't truly successful at it, I don't think, because each draft was something, but it wasn't enough. And I think there are, as you said, there are writers out there who in 3 days really can put something together. I'm going to need a little more time than that because inevitably I'm going to spend half my time editing. But
yeah,
again,
I can't help it. I do edit some as I go. They tell you not to do it, but you go over and you're like, okay, that's going like nowhere, right? Sometimes I'll take a chunk of stuff that I've written and I'm like, yeah, okay, right, that's going nowhere. And I'll copy and paste it to the end of the document and put a highlighter through it. And that tells me that I don't intend to use that, but I'm still going to count it towards my word count goal.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. You can do that. There's nothing against the rules about that.
No. So your first one was about Dungeons and Dragons. I did notice in one of your bios that you're an old school D&D player.
I am. Yeah, I've been doing it a very long time, and I love it, and I still do it every week. Yeah, we have a regular gaming group right now. We are playing. Actually, I've got 2 going at the moment right now. I do Cyan, which is where you play demigods, and I'm doing a mech warrior role play game where it's not, like we do the board fights, but it's also about the characters. So,
do you find that? Because I remember, like in the '80s, there was like even several TV shows had like plot lines where the D&D, it was like devil worshippers and it was bad. And I think we're at a much different place now. As people that are into that kind of thing, I think maybe you feel like it's a little more mainstream now.
I was just talking about how it's weird how nerd culture has become so much more mainstream. I remember a time when nobody knew, anything about, say, even Star Trek. They had only the vaguest idea, right? And Stephen Colbert did this whole thing on his show about the Super Bowl, and he had Patrick Stewart, who was, coming in and hanging out, and they were making jokes about violating the Prime Directive. And I thought to myself, everybody understands that,
Yeah.
It's so cool that everybody understands that. We don't require any explanation. But yeah, at the time, you bet. It was definitely a marginalized pastime. I fell into a lot of marginalized groups. If I went to hell for everything I've been told I would go to hell for, I tell you, I must be the whore of Babylon. You bet.
I know, it's really interesting. I think that whole, quote unquote nerd culture has come a long way. It's way more mainstream, and maybe sometimes to the now all we get is comic book movies.
Large. Well,
the flip side.
This is,
the tech finally caught up, and it did allow comic books to be filmed.
Yes.
I think for years you could not do it. It strictly had to live on the page. Tech has caught up.
An astute observation. I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it, but you're right. Yeah.
Because some early, they've always tried to film comic books, some of the early Superman, and maybe at the time the special effects looked okay, but nothing that held up.
Right.
But the recent wave, you can film anything now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they filmed Lord of the Rings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, despite the many criticisms about the series, I think it looks great. It was pretty much how I pictured it.
It's interesting though. I still feel like as a reader, nothing beats your own imagination.
I agree. There is still stuff that is very difficult to come across on a film. I have an example, actually. Recently, a series that I read, the Honor Harrington series by David Weber, was optioned for movie rights, and they started going into production. And there is a sentient, 6-legged cat type creature named Nimitz, who is Honor's companion, right? They have a telepathic bond. Right? So he's very important to the story. You can't exclude him. And what they were going to do, I guess, because this was before Guardians of the Galaxy came out, right? So I think maybe they changed their tune now. But they thought that, I guess trying to portray such a creature on film that was fluffy and potentially cute might not work very well in CGI. So they were going to make him some kind of reptile. And the fan outcry was so bad. Right. And I admit, I chimed in with that. I'm like, what? That is never going to work. You're going to totally spoil the character completely. Right. Oh no. I'm going to go see it anyway. But, I'm really holding my breath about that. And I think it deep sixed the whole project. I think that is why we haven't seen it yet. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's still tough. I mean, but hey, Rocket looks great. So I know you can do it now. But maybe when they started doing it, you couldn't, right? And that's, the tech's changing so quickly. That was just a couple of years difference. Right? Yeah.
I know we're way off tangent here, but I have to say with Guardians of the Galaxy a couple of years ago, I thought that might be the one that doesn't do well. It's, you know, like when you look at that, it shouldn't work.
Nope.
Like it really shouldn't work in a way. And God, they're hilarious. Like I love them.
They're awesome.
They're just, but when you think about, okay, a raccoon, you got a tree, and Marvel, I mean, the nerds knew, but they sold it to the, you know, mainstream because I think they made a good movie, regardless of, you know, what it's about.
They've done a good job of breaking us into it slowly over the past several years. The early Marvel Universe movies, you know, weren't as out there as the current ones are, right? There was very much grounded in our
great
world.
Place to start. It's a human. He's just smart. He's wealthy. It's no superpowers. It's just tech. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and they slowly started introducing more and more elements. It really, I think it's a great creation. I realize that a lot of people are like, oh, comic book movies are fluff, but I really think that 100 years from now, people are going to be looking back at the Marvel Universe movies and going, now that was a cultural achievement.
When you think, I mean, how many, we've never seen 20 movies or whatever it is, or whatever it's going to be, all connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like there's the board they must have, or the files they must have. I think as a writer, I just appreciate the work that went in to connecting movies, not just the next movie, but 4 movies from now. This little moment is going to pay off here that was here.
I know, right?
It's hard enough as a single author, I think, right? To connect stuff through a book or through a short story even, but to do it with budgets of $500-600 million, thousands of people involved, it's pretty amazing.
I mean, how many times have you gone back over your manuscript when you're like halfway through and you realize that you've changed the, you know, color of the eyes of the best friend of the main character, or you've, you know, I found that I'd done it with one of the horse characters that appeared in Wyrd West. I changed, she started as a chestnut and then she was dappled later on. And I'm like, no.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I hadn't published that yet. I was still reading through, so I got it. But I mean, how many times have they had an opportunity to do that in the MCU and they haven't done it, right? Star Wars can't claim that. Star Wars has lots of internal inconsistencies, right? So,
it's an amazing.
I'm not a Star Wars fan. I am, but that's not here nor there.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. It's got holes. It's got plot holes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It is an amazing feat of just making movies. I think whether you love them or hate them or whatever your take is, I think just from a craft standpoint.
Absolutely.
And they're all, you know, they have the moments of brevity, the moments of more seriousness. Like they just work. Whether it's the death of originality or not, I don't know. You know, we're not seeing a lot of original things come out. It's more like, does it already have a fan base? Then that's the only reason we can, you know, put money behind it. But I think it's just it's the time we're in right now, and it'll swing back.
Okay, this is a bit of a soapbox, but bringing it back to our little indie project, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Good segue.
Yeah, well, no, it's you know, it is all connected. Okay, right now we're in a time when big corporations are the ones that get everything done, right? Art, in a large extent, is owned by large corporations. The fact is, they don't necessarily like they're even I'm not going to say people who are running it aren't idealistic, and maybe they really do want to bring great quality art to the world and support ideas and creativity, but the corporate structure answers to the shareholders, and the shareholders require you to increase the value of your company. So what a company, ultimately a corporation, is looking for is a marketable product, right? And if you've got some out there idea like Weird Westerns, right, people don't want to invest in that because it's not tried and true. It's obscure. It's weird, right? It's strange. So they don't know. It's a big risk if they're going to put a lot of money into it. So they invest. And this is true, I think, of large publishing as well as, you know, blockbuster movies, right? Why do they keep recycling the same 3 Philip K. Dick novels as their science fiction coolness movies, right? Because Philip K. Dick sells and they know it. They've tried it, right? Yeah. So you want to break that mold. You've got to hit the same buttons that stuff that has already proven itself does. And cool, no shame if you can do that, right? That's great. I hope to do that myself. I'm not saying I'm, indie publishing is so much better than traditional publishing. I obviously don't believe that. I've published in both spheres, right? Mm-hmm. But I recognize that some projects are not going to be suited for the mainstream market, and that is the point of indie publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. What's I've self-published before, and I always thought that it's amazing that we have the ability now. It's no longer vanity press. I have to order physical copies. Like, it's a much different world. And I self-published in 2009. So actually, I'm not even where we are now as far as Kickstarter and Inkshares and all these different platforms and digital books, and print on demand was nowhere near where it was when I did it. But I always felt like it was a bit of a responsibility as a self-publisher, because there's just so much out there that if you don't put out the best product possible, it muddies the water, so to speak. Of course, that's always subjective, what's good and what's not. But what's your experience with self-publishing, and how do you feel?
I do think that a lot of people are putting out things before they're ready.
Yeah.
One of the big critiques about indie publishing is bad editing, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because people are having difficulty affording editors. I mean, a publisher does a lot for you, right? They edit your work. They have in-house editors that do it, right? They do the marketing for you. They have better connections than you do. I don't care how well known you are as an indie writer. I got radio shows through Red Wheel Weiser, who published The Witch's 8 Paths of Power. I can't get, radio shows to talk to some indie writer in interior BC, right? Yeah. They've got all this, access, distribution. Distribution's a big one. Distribution's a big one.
Oh, that's huge.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, right there. An independent writer ends up having to do all the stuff themselves, right? And the truth is, there's reasons why these jobs are specialties. Mm-hmm. Above all, bad editing, I think, is the thing that is a legit critique. I have read some really badly edited indie writing, and I read a fair bit of indie writing because I want to promote indie writers. And I get it, right? Because I'm broke too, right? So fortunately, I have a partner who is willing to edit my stuff, right? So and he's good at it, right? So I think that I'm producing something that isn't a bad quality product, right? But I would suggest if indie writers want to get stuff out there that isn't badly, you can never edit your own work properly. There's stuff you're going to miss. There's things that seem perfectly clear to you that is not going to come across to a reader, and you need to know what those things are. So do exchanges if you can't pay for it, right?
Good idea, yeah.
But don't just exchange with anybody, because I've done collective projects like that too, where the idea is that, we're going to publish this collective book bundle, right? All us indie writers. And somebody has to edit, you have to edit somebody else's, right? That's part of you contribute your own and you edit somebody else's. And some people are not as good at English as I am. I don't want to be rude about it, but that's just the way it is, right? So trust the ability of the person that you're, doing exchange of services with, but do it, right? Even if it's just a buddy, don't do it yourself, because there are things that, you're going to miss. And because there's so much of it out there, indie publishing in general often has that reputation. I found that my public library was very snobby about it. I had to, the only reason why they let me do my book launch there was because I had something traditionally published elsewhere.
Already. Yeah.
Which is a shame.
I'm always shocked by, I mean, I know they have their reasons and I get it, but indie bookstores that are themselves independent they're very, very hesitant to involve independently published authors who aren't already in chapters, but you're like, but you're not chapters. It's just, you know, and I know that they open up to one, then they've got 20 coming through the door and shelf space is limited. I get it, but that's tough. I think that's the hardest thing I found about self-publishing.
Yes.
As hard as and this is, 10 years ago now, but as hard as getting the product out was, which was hard. It takes a toll when you're doing everything yourself. I mean, I had a graphic designer and I had an editor, but still you feel 95% done. You're like, I got the book out, but you're like 10% done.
That's
because
right.
Nobody knows about it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes on and on forever. To be fair, right. Having worked at independent bookstores, right. They don't have time to read everything that comes in there from local independent writers. And the truth is our culture has this idea somehow that if somebody else stamps a seal on what you've done, then it's legitimate. But if you just do it yourself, then it's not, right? And we do this with everything. We do this with training, right? Everything requires certification now that costs a bunch of money, right? And, well, what about the guy who's been doing the job for 20 years? I think he knows more than a guy who took a 2-month course. But still, the guy with the certification is going to get the job, not the guy with the 20 years experience. So the guy with 20 years experience has to go get the certificate. We got this. And it's that cultural pressure plus the fact that there is a lot of badly edited indie writing out there is, it's hurting us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a shame.
Yeah, I think, there's always the people, I think, that because we have the ability to do it now, you don't have, you can do everything from your desktop, publish, promote. That doesn't necessarily mean you should. I see both sides. I've definitely always dreamed of the traditional published thing, and I have traditionally published things.
Yes, you do.
I think I learned enough from self-publishing, and I'm like, I'm not enough of a marketer to really make it work. I think you just have to be a tireless self-promoter, and that's not necessarily, although I've tried to work on it, not necessarily my best skill.
It's not my best either. But, okay, 2 things I've learned. One is that if you don't sell your work, nobody else will, right? If you don't believe in it, nobody else believes in it, right? And I've done that as an independent musician as well as an independent writer, but I also find that even in traditional publishing, more and more these days, they expect writers to carry a bulk of the marketing load. Unless you got like a 6-figure advance, they are not going to pay for your book tour, right?
It's a different world. Yeah.
Yeah. So regardless of which path you choose, you need to work on the marketing skills. And I suck at it. Like I said, I'm always struggling with crippling self-doubt, right? But wow. I think I'm good at this. I think I'm a pretty good writer, and I think I've turned out to be a pretty good editor too. Right. So I like to, and why shouldn't I be proud of that? Right. But I've got to talk myself into it. Right.
Wow. If you suck at marketing, I am terrible. Because
there are people out there who are so amazing. Shout out to CL Cannon, who runs Fiction Atlas Press. She's probably the best indie marketer that I know. Also, shout out to Joe Compton, who runs Go Indie Now. Right.
Great.
They, but I don't know. Right. Like, I think they often spend more time in marketing and promoting indie work than they do on writing their own. And I don't want to do that. I admire them that they can, right? And they obviously love what they do, and they're doing great work. But, I just,
find the balance.
Right. Yeah. So that's why I decided to go hybrid, right? Because I want the best of both worlds. I don't know. Ask me in 5 years how that worked out.
I was going to add this in earlier when we were had just talked about it, but I have to say that definitely when I saw the call for Gunsmoke and Dragonfire, it seemed very, although now I'm learning that, you know, you did it quick and you weren't sure, but it seemed so pro. I'm like, oh yeah, I have no problem sending out, because sometimes you wonder, do I want to send out a piece of work? And is this something that A, I think will happen, or B, sounds like I would want the finished, you know, you just, but I had no.
Are you going to be proud of having your work appear in that, or is it going to deep six somewhere with a, you know, a shit show? Yeah, that's fair. And thank you for trusting me. And
absolutely, right away. It seemed very, and I think just because you had like an image, although it was a temporary image at that time. I remember like a Wild West scenario, I think, with some tech of some sort.
Yeah, and dinosaurs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. All right. Yeah. So.
Well, good, because I wanted people to get an idea of what I was picturing. So I'm glad that worked. Thank you for letting me know. It's first feedback.
And it clearly did for others too, because now we're in February and we're a month away from hopefully launching this thing.
And there's so many good writers. I was so surprised and pleased and honored at the caliber of writer that has submitted stories to this. Like, this is, you know, I can't bloviate about it enough. It's so good, right? I'm a little intimidated by some of your talents, honestly, right? Like, your story impressed the hell out of me. A lot of people's stories impressed the hell out of me. It's so good. And a lot of them are established, right? And, you know, some of them are award winners and some are brand new, right? I got a story. Okay, shout out to a story. It's called A Prayer for the Reaping Season. It's by Mackenzie Kincaid, right? This is one of the last stories that'll appear in the book. And I was so impressed with this. And then she's like, oh, thank you. This is my second acceptance. I'm awesome. Like, are you shitting me? You know? No. No way. I was like, wow. So you know, there's I'm going to nominate her for whatever awards I can. I think her story's great.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what's next for you, writing-wise, editing-wise? Are you planning on being an editor again? What's on for Diane Morrison?
Oh,
and/or Sable Aradia.
And/or Sable Aradia. Well, Sable will continue to write the blogs that she writes. She writes for, I write for Pathos.com, which is a multi-faith site. And I write for witchesandpagans.com, which is a specifically pagan site. And occasionally I appear in a leftist pagan magazine called Gods and Radicals. And I will continue to do that. I do plan for there to be another book. The first book was, okay, here's all the elements about the practice of witchcraft, the stuff that people think of, right? Magic, and why you do it and how it's done, right? And I'm not going to get into my philosophy of magic, but basically to say, jury's out as to whether there's legit effects with it in the world or whether it's just your psychology. But either way, it's still valuable and still useful and still does good things for you, I believe. So that's why. Okay. But the next book is going to be about the theology, right? There's a shortage of books about Wiccan theology out there. People, because it seems so nebulous, people often, I guess they're a little intimidated by attacking it from that point of view. So I'd like to, and I don't, and it's, you know, I keep rethinking it. It's about a third done. It's been about a third done for 2 years, you know, right? Because I keep changing things, but it will happen eventually. I can't promise when. Okay, Diane, she is much more happening stuff going on at the moment, right? Okay, so I'm currently editing that fan fiction project that was my first Nano project, and I have taken all the fan fiction stuff out of it, and I have rewritten the universe to be my own universe.
Oh, nice.
And it's right now, it's kind of in going through its final edit stage before I send it to, you know, out into the world to see if I can land a traditional publishing contract. So it's fantasy space opera. So here I am breaking all the genres again. I love doing that. I think it's fun.
Yeah. Best thing.
Absolutely. right? So, yeah, and yeah, so that's going on there. I'm still working on short stories, and they will appear in different magazines and anthologies from time to time, I hope. I don't have, I have something that's being held for consideration right now, so I'm not going to give details about that, but we'll see if it comes out. Let's see, what else am I doing? I took a year off from writing the Wyrd West Chronicles, and now I'm going back on. So after March, there will be another sequence of stories. And what I like to do with those is that there's an overarching story that happens in the sequence, right? But each is also its own individual story. So I'm intending to do that, right? The Teeth of Winter does not fall in that sequence, right? That's part of why it's in Gunsmoke and Dragonfire, right? And yes, there will be at least, I'm thinking probably the same time next year. I was going to do it faster than that, but like I said, I found that this is a lot, right? So probably again in August, I'll put out another call, and it's going to be for fantasy space opera, because it interests me, right? And planetary romance, right? So, think Edgar Rice Burroughs, Andre Norton, that kind of thing.
So another one from your Sable Aradia publishing, Aradia publishing, right? Yes. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been fun. I don't know how we're doing for time, but
oh yeah, it's been an hour. Yeah.
Okay.
I know, I've been having so much fun too.
Oh, there's one other question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, sure.
You also do something on YouTube for the SFWA. Yes. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I am the manager of the official Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America YouTube channel. Right. So mostly what I'm doing there is talk programs. I work with Kat Rambo, the president of SFWA, right? And usually she's much better at getting people that you've heard of to respond than I am. But she does that. She gets a hold of people who are SFWA members, and lots of them, are people that I'm fans of. And and then I reach out to independent writers mostly, because that's the field I'm most familiar with. And we put them together in panels, and we discuss things that are related to science fiction and fantasy. My next panel is going to be broadcast live tomorrow. As a matter of fact, I forget what time though. I should know this, but I think it was, I think it's noon or 1 o'clock, but I'm pretty sure it was noon Pacific. Right. And that will be, there's two of these programs that I do. One is called The Panel. The other is called Spec Women Chat, which is for women in the field, right? Or people who identify femme, right? So, and that's because they don't generally get as much publicity, right? So that's why we do that. But they are intended to be monthly, but they aren't, because it's really hard to herd all these busy people into one time slot. It tends to be bi-monthly, but it does come out. I also put out a short video going over pro markets that are accepting submissions that month. And I do occasionally I'll air podcasts that I've been given permission to air, or reading series, right? I might do, there's a game chat thing that Kat Rambo does. And there's only one episode so far, but there are 2 that are in editing currently, and they will be out soon. So lots of related stuff about science fiction and fantasy, and they want to reach out to the community. So if you have ideas, pitch them, right? Email me, tell me, right? Because they want to get stuff out there, and they want to connect to the community.
Oh, fantastic! You're busy.
Yeah. I love it though. I do.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes I find that I put too much on my plate, and I have to let some things go.
Scale back. Yeah.
Yeah. So occasionally I'll disappear from social media for months at a time. And that's usually what I'm doing, is regrouping. Right. Yeah.
Well, I personally find your hustle very inspiring. So
well, thank you.
I think there could not be a better shepherd of this book as an editor. And so I look forward to to getting this thing out and getting some reviews and getting it out there. I'm excited.
Yes, advanced review copies will be available within the next few days. I'm
awesome.
going to start sending out, because I mean, advanced review, you don't expect it to look like it's going to look like, but the text is done. So within the next few days, those will be available. So ask me. If you got a blog, you want to do a review, I'll send you a copy. I don't care who we are. The more press we get, the better. Even bad press is good press, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I learned from you that any sort of pre-orders on Amazon count towards the first day or some.
Yes,
right?
The pre-orders count towards your total sales rank on the first day. We're doing really well with pre-orders. I'm very happy with it. So I hope to release in a high spot. Right. I think it's a realistic expectation. So keep your fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
And you can still pre-order it for only $2.99 right now. The price is going up to full price at the end of February.
You heard it here, folks. And check out the Kickstarter.
Yes. Yes, definitely check out the Kickstarter. There's lots of cool prizes and rewards. I don't know. Nobody's gone for the art stuff yet. I don't know why. Maybe because I haven't posted the images. I'm going to do that in an update in the next couple of days. Probably tomorrow, maybe later today. There's some great stuff out there. Even if you're like, there's a whole ebook package. There's
so many good
donated their paperbacks. Like you can get a whole library of paperbacks from the authors in this anthology, and they're good writers. You want these books, I'm telling you.
I ordered myself a hardcover this morning. So,
yay! Thank you.
I'm in.
Awesome.
Looking forward to that.
Cool.
Well, I hope the tables being turned was okay and good. And
I'm always a little nervous when I do these, so I babble. I hope I have not been too babbly, but thank you.
No, definitely not. Super interesting stuff. Thank you.
I really appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks for doing this.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. You too. Bye.